Hello and welcome back. If you're here right now, I want you to know that you're in the right place. Wherever you are, tucked under a warm blanket, lying in a quiet room, or just letting the day slowly fall away from your shoulders. I'm glad you're here. Take a slow breath in, and then let it all out. There's nothing you need to do right now. Nothing you need to fix or figure out. Tonight, all you need to do is listen. I'm going to tell you a story. A true one. My own. It's a gentle story. A quiet one. The kind that doesn't shout at you or leave you feeling stirred up. It's the kind of story that settles into you softly, the way the last light of evening settles over a field before the stars come out. It's about a cold Tuesday in November, and a diner, and a man I didn't know, and a moment that changed something small but important inside me. Something I carry with me still. So go ahead and get comfortable. Let your body sink into wherever you're resting. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands go soft. I'll do the talking, and all you have to do is drift. My name is Clara. Clara Jean Whitmore. Though most people at work just called me CJ. I was 26 years old when this happened, and I had been waitressing at a place called Patsy's Family Diner for about 3 years by then. Patsy sat on the corner of Elm and Ridgeway, in a small city in Ohio. The kind of city that's not quite big enough to feel exciting, but not quite small enough to feel like everyone knows your name. It was the in-between kind of place. Grey in the winter, green in the summer, a little bit tired year-round. The diner itself was not a glamorous place, and it never pretended to be. The booths were covered in red vinyl that had cracked in some spots and been patched with strips of duct tape that nobody ever bothered to match to the original color. The floor was black and white, checkered linoleum that had gone dull from years of mop water and foot traffic. The windows along the front were large and steamed up easily in the cold months, so that from outside you could only see blurry yellow light and the vague shapes of people sitting and eating. But Patsy's had something that a lot of fancier places didn't have. It had warmth. Real warmth. Not the performed kind. The kind that comes from the same cook making the same scrambled eggs for 15 years, from the same regulars sitting in the same booths, from the particular way a place smells when it's been lived in long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. It smelled like coffee and bacon grease, and, on Thursday mornings when Patsy herself came in to bake, like cinnamon and warm butter. The coffee was never fancy. Just plain diner coffee, the kind that's been sitting in a glass pot on a heated burner, a little too long. But people drank it like it was a gift, cupping their hands around the mugs, and staring out at whatever weather was happening outside the window. I loved working there. I want to say that plainly. There are a lot of ways a person can feel about a job they do just to pay rent. And for a while, before Patsy's, I had felt the hollow kind of tired that comes from spending your hours somewhere that doesn't care about you. But Patsy's was different. Patsy Okafor. Her full name was Patricia, but nobody called her that. Was a black woman in her mid-60s who had opened the diner with her late husband, Marcus, 22 years before. She ran the place the way some people run their households, with firmness and gentleness in equal measure, with very clear expectations, and with an almost stubborn insistence on treating every single person who walked through the door like they mattered. You don't have to like every customer, she told me during my first week, standing in the little supply closet off the kitchen, while I refilled the napkin holders. But you do have to see them. Really see them. That's the job. I had nodded then, mostly because she was my boss and I wanted to keep the job. But over time, I came to understand what she meant. I had come to waitressing by a roundabout way, the way most people come to jobs they didn't exactly plan for. I had gone to community college for 2 years after high school, studying something vague and hopeful, general studies, then communications, then graphic design for 1 semester before. I ran out of money and ran out of momentum at about the same time. I moved back in with my mother for 6 months, which was not a bad thing exactly, but was the kind of thing that makes you feel the weight of your own unfinished edges. My mother was kind but tired herself. She worked at a dry cleaner and came home, smelling faintly of chemical steam, and always asked how my day was even, when she was too exhausted to really hear the answer. I got the job at Patsy's because my friend, Donna, who I had known since the 5th grade, told me they were hiring and the tips were decent. I applied on a Wednesday, got called back on Friday, started the following Monday. I wasn't sure at first that I was cut out for it. I was not naturally an outgoing person. I was quiet in the way some people are quiet. Not shy, exactly, but internal. I spent a lot of time inside my own thoughts. I noticed things without always knowing what to do with what I noticed. But it turned out that some of those qualities were actually useful for the work. The noticing, especially. Knowing when someone's coffee was getting low before they had to ask. Seeing that a family at a corner table had a tired toddler and bringing out the food faster than usual. Reading the room, the way Patsy called it. By the time the November I'm telling you about rolled around, I had gotten pretty good at reading the room. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday, because Tuesday was always a slow day at Patsy's, the slowest of the week, and we had a running joke among the staff about how Tuesdays felt like the diner was holding its breath. The morning rush came and went with less urgency than usual. The lunch crowd was thin. By 2 in the afternoon, the place had settled into that particular kind of quiet that only a near-empty diner can achieve. Low music from the radio behind the counter, the occasional clink of dishes being washed in the back, the hiss of the espresso machine that Patsy had added 2 years ago, mostly to seem modern. The weather outside was the kind that makes everything feel a little slower and a little more tender. It was November, so the trees along Elm Street had shed nearly all their leaves and stood bare and dark, against a sky that had been the same, flat shade of pewter since morning. It wasn't raining, but it had that feeling of about to, that dampness in the air that seeps through your coat and sits against your skin. The temperature had dropped enough that the windows had started to cloud with condensation along the bottom edges. I was on a 6-hour shift that day. I had come in at 10 and was due off at 4, and I remember thinking around 2:30 that the day had been so quiet I might actually make it through without anything worth remembering. I had refilled the salt and pepper shakers. I had wiped down the counter twice. I had eaten half a grilled cheese sandwich in the kitchen while leaning against the stainless steel prep table and talking to Raymond, the cook, about whether it was going to snow before Thanksgiving. Raymond thought yes. I thought no. Neither of us was particularly invested in being right. There were maybe 5 people in the diner at that point. 2 older women in the second booth, sharing a piece of pie and talking quietly about someone named Linda. A man in a baseball cap nursing a cup of coffee at the far end of the counter. A young couple near the window, not talking to each other but not unhappy looking either, just comfortable in the way of people who have been together long enough to not need to fill every silence with words. And then the door opened. I heard it before I saw anything. The particular sound of the diner door, which had a little bell that rang when it swung open, and also a long creak that Patsy had been meaning to fix for at least a year. I was behind the counter refilling the napkin dispensers and I looked up in the automatic way you do when you've worked a front of house job long enough that your body reacts to the door before your brain does. The man who came in was old. Or rather, he looked old. I say it that way because I would later think about how certain kinds of hard living can add years to a person's face that don't belong to their actual age. He might have been 60. He might have been 50. It was genuinely difficult to tell. He had a white beard that was not trimmed, but not wild either. Just the beard of a man who wasn't thinking about his beard. His coat was dark grey, one of those heavy canvas coats with no real shape to it anymore, the kind that gets worn until it forgets it was ever new. He wore gloves with the fingertips cut off, and his hands, where they showed, were red and chapped from the cold. He came in slowly, not hesitating exactly, but carefully, the way a person moves when they're not entirely sure of their welcome. He stood just inside the door for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, letting the warmth of the room settle around him. I could see, even from behind the counter, the way his shoulders dropped slightly when the warm air hit him. That particular unwinding of a body that has been braced against the cold for a long time. He looked around the diner, and when his eyes reached me, I nodded at him. The way you do. The instinctive small acknowledgement that means I see you. Come in. You're allowed to be here. He walked to a table near the back, not the very back, but far enough from the other customers that he wouldn't be in anyone's way. He sat down in the booth facing the wall and not the window, which I noticed but didn't think too much about. Some people prefer not to look out. I gave him a moment to settle. Then I took a menu and a glass of water and walked over. Hi there, I said. How are you doing today? I always said that. It was part of my routine. But with him, standing at his table, I asked it and actually waited for the answer instead of moving straight into the specials. He looked up at me. He had pale blue eyes, the kind that look very clear and very calm, the kind that don't give away very much. Getting warmer, he said. His voice was quiet and a little hoarse, the way voices get in the cold. Good, I said. That's good. Can I start you off with some coffee? He looked at the menu. Then he looked up at me again, and something passed across his face. Something I recognized, though I couldn't have named it in that moment. It was the look of a person doing math that has nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with dignity. Just some water would be fine, he said. Thank you. I set the glass down in front of him. Take your time with the menu, I said. There's no rush today. I went back behind the counter and I tried not to watch him. I failed at that a little. Not in a rude way, not staring, but in the way you watch someone when something in you has quietly become alert to them. He was looking at the menu, but his eyes weren't moving the way eyes move when you're actually reading. They were still. He was just looking at the laminated page without seeing it, or maybe seeing it too clearly, seeing exactly what everything cost and doing that math again. A man came into the diner for warmth and a glass of water on a near-freezing Tuesday afternoon. I didn't need to know his whole story to know something about it. I went into the kitchen and stood at the order window and looked at Raymond, who was leaning against the prep table scrolling through his phone between orders. Hey, I said. I've got a guest in booth 7. I'm going to put in an order for him and I'm going to cover it myself. Can you just ring it in normal? Raymond looked up. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face that didn't often show much surprise. He looked at me for a moment, and then looked toward the dining room and then back at me. Whatever you want, CJ, he said. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. Raymond was good like that. I went back out and walked to booth 7, and the man looked up from the menu. Have you had a chance to decide? I asked. He set the menu down carefully, like it was a thing to be handled gently. I think I'll just stick with the water, he said. Thank you. Can I ask you something? I said. He looked at me, and there was no wariness in his expression, just quiet waiting. Is there anything on the menu that sounds good to you? He was still for a moment. Not defensive, not embarrassed, or maybe a little of both those things, but held very quietly, the way some people learn to hold things. The meatloaf, he said, after a pause. Always liked meatloaf. That comes with mashed potatoes and a vegetable, I said. Green beans today, he nodded, slowly. Sounds real good. Can I put that in for you? Another pause. Longer this time. He looked at the table, then at the window, then at me. Miss, he said, I appreciate it, but I don't have. I'm not in a position right now, too. It's on the house today, I said. I said it the same way I would have said anything else. Not overly bright, not pitying, just simple and plain and matter of fact. We do that sometimes on slow afternoons. That was a lie, technically. We didn't do that. But it was the kind of lie that felt like the truest thing I could say in that moment. The kind of lie that protects something in a person that deserves protecting. He looked at me for a long moment, those pale blue eyes steady and quiet. And then he said, "Thank you," and his voice was a little rougher than it had been before, and he looked back down at the table. "I'll get that started," I said, and I went back to the kitchen. I put in the order. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. Raymond put it together without saying anything extra, and I brought it out on a real plate, not a to-go container, with a cloth napkin folded beside it and a small ramekin of extra gravy that Raymond had added without being asked. I refilled his water without being asked either. He ate slowly. I noticed that. The way he ate slowly, carefully, the way you eat when you want to make something last. He held the fork the way people hold forks when they've had, at some point in their lives, the kind of dinner table where that mattered. Something about that broke a small, quiet part of my heart open, but softly, gently. I went about my work, checked on the couple by the window, refilled the man at the counter's coffee, cleared the two older women's table when they left, pocketing the $4 in ones they'd left under the edge of a plate. Once, when I passed his table, I asked if the food was all right. He looked up and said, "It's wonderful. Really wonderful." And the way he said the word wonderful, it was like he meant it all, the way down to somewhere deeper than just the food. I nodded and said I was glad, and I moved on. He stayed for about 45 minutes. When the plate was clean, and it was clean, not a trace of gravy left, he sat for a little while longer with his water glass, looking out the window at the grey afternoon. There was something peaceful about the way he sat there, not waiting for anything, just being somewhere warm for a little while. When he finally pushed himself up from the booth, he gathered himself slowly, the way the cold stiffness in a body reasserts itself when it knows it's about to go back out into the weather. He put on his coat, pulled on his cut-finger gloves, and then stood for a moment. He looked around until he found me, and when he did, he gave me a nod. Just a nod. But it was the full kind, the kind that carries more than a nod usually carries. I nodded back. He walked to the door, and the little bell rang when he pushed it open, and the creak rang out too. And then he was gone, back out into the pewter grey and the cold that was sitting over everything. I stood at the counter for a moment just watching the door. Then I went into the kitchen and told Raymond to ring up the meatloaf, and I paid for it out of my tips for the day. $11.50. Plus I added a $2 tip for Raymond since he'd done the cooking. Raymond took the money without comment. Then he said, "You want some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "Yeah," I said. "I'll take a cup." And we stood in the kitchen for a few minutes, not talking, just drinking the coffee. The warmth of the kitchen felt very good right then. I didn't tell anyone about it that day. Not Donna, not my mother, not the couple I was friendly with down the hall in my apartment building. It didn't feel like a story to tell, exactly. It felt like something that had happened and been completed in itself, the way some moments are. Whole and quiet. I drove home after my shift with the radio on low, the heater in my old Civic blowing warm air against my face. The streets were wet now. It had started to drizzle at some point in the late afternoon, and the headlights of other cars reflected off the pavement in long orange ribbons. I remember thinking about the man in the grey coat and wondering where he went when he left the diner, whether he had a place to be out of the rain, whether he had someone, anywhere, who knew his name. I didn't know his name. I hadn't asked, and he hadn't offered it. And that had seemed right somehow. Not every exchange needs to become something bigger than what it is. Sometimes a warm meal in a diner, booth on a cold Tuesday, Afternoon is exactly the size it needs to be. I want to tell you something about the weeks after that day, because I think it matters to the shape of the story. I started noticing things differently. That's the only way I can describe it. Not dramatically, not in a way that changed my whole life in some sudden burst of revelation. Nothing like that. It was quieter than that. It was more like something had been adjusted slightly inside me. The way you adjust the focus on a pair of binoculars and everything that was already there becomes a little clearer. I started to see the people who came into Patsy's with a little more of the patience and attention that Patsy had been trying to teach me from the beginning. The man who always ordered one coffee and no food and sat for 2 hours, doing crossword puzzles. I started leaving the coffee pot closer to his table so he could refill it himself without feeling like he had to ask. The elderly woman who came in on Friday mornings and always looked at the slice of pie in the case for a long time before ordering just the soup one Friday. I told her that we had a small piece of cherry that was going to go stale if someone didn't take it, and would she mind helping us out? I made sure it was cherry. I had noticed a few weeks earlier that she'd mentioned to another customer that cherry was her favorite. These were not grand gestures. I wasn't trying to save anyone or fix anything. I was just looking, really looking, the way Patsy had told me to do. And it turned out that looking was its own kind of action, even when nothing visible came of it. About 6 weeks after that Tuesday, something happened that I didn't expect. I was working a weekend shift, a Saturday morning, which was the busiest time of the week at Patsy's, the time when the diner filled up with families and old friends meeting for breakfast and people sleeping off. Friday nights. The air was warm and smelled like pancakes and maple syrup, and the radio was playing something soft and seasonal, because it was December by then, close to the holidays. A woman came in alone and sat in booth 7. Booth 7 was the one near the back where the man in the grey coat had sat. I noticed it the same way I noticed most things, without deciding to. She was maybe 70, well dressed in a practical way, a good winter coat and sensible shoes, her white hair cut short and neat. She had a face that looked like it had been through a lot, and was at peace with that. She ordered scrambled eggs and wheat toast and a decaf coffee, and when I brought it out, she thanked me in a way that was more specific than the usual thanks. She looked at me when she said it, really looked. When I came to clear her plate later, she stopped me. "I hope you don't mind me asking," she said. "Do you work here most days?" "Most days," I said. "Tuesdays through Sundays?" She nodded, looking at her coffee cup. "My brother came in here about 6 weeks ago," she said. "On a Tuesday. He said a young woman with brown hair was very kind to him. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there with her plate in my hand. He described you," she said. "Said you had brown hair and you were quiet but kind. Said you brought him the best meal he'd had in a long time and told him it was on the house." I felt something rise up in me then, warm and a little overwhelming, and I made myself stay steady with it. "I remember him," I said. "He seemed like a good man." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that has some sadness inside it, but is a smile nonetheless. "He is," she said. "He's had some hard years. Some very hard years. Our family, we fell out of touch with him for a while. It's complicated. But he called me that Tuesday evening, and he told me about coming into this diner. And he said something about it made him feel like himself again, just for a little while. And I thought," she paused and pressed her lips together for a moment. "I thought, I want to find that place. Find that person." I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "I'm glad he called you." "So am I," she said. And then, after a moment, "His name is Gerald." Gerald. I thought about him sitting in that booth with his clear blue eyes and his careful eating, and his cut finger gloves. "Gerald. It's nice to know that," I said. She left me a $20 tip on a $9 check. I thought about putting it back, leaving it at the hostess stand in an envelope in case she came back, returning it somehow. But then I thought that maybe she wanted to do that, wanted to give something back in kind, the way people need to sometimes, the way it closes a circle. So I kept it. I split it with Raymond. I want to take a moment here to tell you what I've thought about in the years since that Tuesday, because it's been some years now, and the thinking has gone on quiet and slow the whole time, the way certain things do. I've thought about what made me put in that order. I've turned it over and tried to understand it, and I think what I've come to is this. It was simply that I saw him. I saw him the way Patsy had always told me to see people. Not his surface, not the coat and the gloves and the hollow way he looked at the menu. Or not only that, I saw that he was a person who was cold and hungry and was trying to manage the very particular indignity of being both of those things in a place where other people were warm and fed. I saw that he was handling it with a kind of quiet dignity that deserved to be met with some quiet dignity in return. And I could do something. That was the other part of it. I could actually do something. It wasn't a big something, $11.50 out of my tips. The work Raymond had already done. A plate and some gravy and a cloth napkin. It was a small something. But small somethings are what most of us actually have to offer. Most of the time. And I think we sometimes make the mistake of waiting until we have something bigger before we give anything at all. I don't think of myself as an especially generous person. I want to be honest about that. I have plenty of ordinary selfishness. Plenty of days when I walk past things I could help and don't help them. Plenty of moments when I'm too tired or too wrapped up in my own worries to look up and see what's in front of me. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to think I'm someone who always does the right thing. I'm telling it because it's one of the times I did, and because I think about it still, and because it taught me something I keep learning. What it taught me is that kindness is often very small and very quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It just slips into a moment the way warmth slips into a cold room when someone finally turns on the heat. Not dramatic, not fanfare, just a slow and steady change in the temperature of things. And sometimes, just sometimes, that small quiet thing ripples out in ways you couldn't have predicted and didn't plan for. A man who eats a meal. A man who goes home and calls his sister. A sister who drives to a diner 6 weeks later to find the person her brother told her about. A circle that closes gently without any of us having planned the shape of it. I kept working at Patsy's for another 2 years after that. I left eventually, not because anything went wrong, but because my life needed to move forward in some direction, and a new direction offered itself. I went back to school, did finish that graphic design certificate, finally, and got a job at a small firm that made materials for non-profits. Work that felt, in its own way, like a version of what Patsy had always been pointing me toward. Seeing people, and then doing something with what you see. But Patsy's is the place I think of when I think of learning things. The real kind of learning. The kind that happens in between everything else. When you're refilling napkin dispensers and making coffee, and just being present in a room with other people and paying attention. Gerald's sister. Her name was Margaret. I learned from a note she left for me with Patsy the following week. Sent a card to the diner at Christmas time. Patsy gave it to me in the little supply closet, where she had first told me about really seeing people, which felt right. The card had a winter scene on it. Bare trees and snow, and inside Margaret had written simply, "Gerald is doing better. He's staying with us now. Thank you for the meal and for seeing him." I taped it to the inside of my locker. It stayed there until the day I left. And now, here we are, you and I, at the soft end of the story. I hope it settled around you gently, the way I meant it to. I hope it didn't stir anything up, or leave you feeling like you need to do something, fix something, change something. That's not what tonight is for. Tonight is for rest. If there's anything I'd want to leave with you before you drift off, it's just this. Most of the time, kindness doesn't ask very much of us. It asks us to look up, to see, To meet a person's eyes and let them know they're real to you, that their presence has registered, that you're not going to look through them the way the world so often does. You probably did something like that today, maybe without even noticing. A door held open for someone. A smile at the person behind a counter. Patience with a stranger who was moving too slowly. These things matter. They matter the way warmth matters on a cold day. Not because they solve everything, but because they change the temperature. Because they make it a little easier to breathe. Gerald is doing better. He's staying with his family now. And I made $11.50 on a quiet Tuesday afternoon do something I couldn't have planned. That's all. That's the whole story. And it's a true one. So go ahead now and let it settle into the quiet place where good things rest. Let the grey sky over Elm Street fade. Let the smell of coffee and warm meatloaf grow distant and soft. Let the little bell on the diner door ring one more time, very faintly, and then go still. You're warm. You're safe. The day is done, and you can put it down now. Every bit of it, and just rest. Good night. Sleep well. And tomorrow, if you can, look up and see someone. It's the quietest, most ordinary, most important thing in the world. True tales for dreamers. Stories told slowly, for the end of the day.